This is Campbell's Biology 7th edition, Chapter 10 on photosynthesis, Part 1. So we're talking about the process of converting the sun's energy into chemical energy in the form of chemical bonds. Plants and other autotrophs are the ones that do this. And they convert it into or make it into organic molecules by combining or using water and CO2, carbon dioxide. So we often talk about photosynthesis in regards to plants. It's not only plants. Of course, there's various other protists, some prokaryotes like cyanobacteria that you can see at the bottom here, and also a whole variety of algae. Here you see what looks like seaweed because it is seaweed. Seaweed is actually not a plant, it is an algae. Then heterotrophs will eat other things to obtain the energy found in those chemical bonds. They are the consumers, if you like. And here's where we have photosynthesis occurring in the mesophyll cells of the leaves, specifically, or at least most plants, it occurs in the leaves. And inside those cells, we have chloroplasts, one type of plastid. And this chloroplast, you'll see the double membrane here, outer and inner. And then inside, we have these stacks of these things, to me, that look like green pancakes. And individually, they're called thylakoids, or one thylakoid. And a stack of them is a granum. Many stacks we call grana. This is the overall equation for photosynthesis. CO2, water, and light makes glucose, oxygen, and water. And there you see the equation is balanced, of course, and you all know and love stoichiometry. So chloroplasts, one of the important components that we'll talk about is that water has to be split. And the components of water are taken and used for different things. Here you see the two reactants and where the different atoms within the reactants go as part of the products. But water itself, you'll see later, is going to be split into three components: oxygen, hydrogen ions, and electrons, free electrons. Now, photosynthesis is a redox reaction, just like we saw in respiration. Photosynthesis is basically the opposite of respiration. And once again, the thing that is getting reduced is gaining electrons, and the things that's being oxidized is losing electrons. In photosynthesis, water is being oxidized, and the carbon dioxide is being reduced. Now, photosynthesis has two main parts. There's the light reactions, and then there's the Calvin cycle. In earlier classes, some of you might have learned the Calvin cycle is the dark reactions, or the dark cycle. I don't like to call it the dark reactions or the dark cycle because that implies that it only occurs in the dark, which is inaccurate. Although, as I say that, I would have to backtrack a little bit and say that usually the Calvin cycle does occur at night. Focusing on the light reactions, they occur inside the grana, so inside the thylakoids specifically, on the membrane of the thylakoids. And the overall process, or the overall idea, is that water gets split, oxygen gets released, ATP gets produced, and we also form NADPH. Now here's a little bit of a change that you saw from respiration in Chapter 9, where we formed NADH. In photosynthesis, we form NADPH. It's a different molecule, and the way that I typically tell students to remember it is you have the P for photosynthesis, NADPH. Then the Calvin cycle occurs inside the stroma of the thylakoids, which is the fluid inside the inner membrane. It's essentially the equivalent to the Krebs cycle from respiration, which also occurred inside the matrix of the mitochondria. The equivalent is the stroma of the chloroplast, and that's where the Calvin cycle occurs. And here's where we form sugar. We take a bunch of carbon dioxides and we combine them together using ATP and NADPH. The energy comes from NADPH, which is an electron carrier, like we saw previously in Chapter 9, and ATP, the energy molecule that you all know and love. And the energy from those is used to take a bunch of carbon dioxides and combine them together to make sugar. And the ATP and the NADPH came from the light reactions. So here's an overview tying them together. Water is used in the light reactions with, of course, light, releases oxygen, and the products of the light reactions include ATP and NADPH. Although, keep in mind, it's a small amount of ATP, not a ton. And those are added to the Calvin cycle, whereby it combines a bunch of CO2s to make a sugar. We'll take a pause on this.